Well, welcome everyone, and we are glad that you can join us. My name is John. I'm the pastor of Beggar's Table in the Crossroads, which is actually where we are right now if you're watching the video. And this is my friend Rustin, who's the pastor of Vox Day and in Belton, and we've always been friends, and our churches have been friends too. Regardless of whether people have known that or not. I don't know that everyone knows that, but a lot of people at Beggar's Table know that and know you, and I know it's the same vice versa. So, and we've told the story many times, but the truth of the matter is that Rustin and I have been collaborating on sermons for years and years. And it's been noted in our world, the ministry world before. One time I was asked to write an article in a magazine, a Christian publication, about developing sermons with somebody else, because it's such a novel thing. So this conversation is not necessarily new to Rustin and I, but the new part is that we're bringing you guys in on it in kind of a more intimate setting, in a more intimate way. And I've heard really good feedback from people that seem to be enjoying this. And of course, like always, the people that don't enjoy it, I just don't hear from. So
don't worry about it.
We just pretend like
I assume they're not watching it anyway. So
exactly. I don't
know, but I do appreciate that, and that this long, many year conversation we've had has been so good. And I can't count the number of times you have saved me from saying something stupid in a sermon that seemed so good to me, and I say, "How about this?" And you're like, "You can't say that."
I can't remember saying that, but I'm sure that's happened to both ways.
It probably has.
Yeah. But so here we are in the Sermon on the Mount. We've been going through that for a while, and one of the reasons is because it's important, and these are actually words, as Jesus says, to build a life on.
Yeah.
But another reason is because the Sermon on the Mount itself is a substantial piece of teaching in Matthew, especially. It's 3 chapters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 3 chapters basically, which is a lot of teaching, and so it's really valuable for us.
It's especially valuable at this moment because of, one of the reasons we gravitated toward this, or maybe it was just kind of our default place to go when the pandemic started, because suddenly we're in chaos, our rhythms are broken, we don't know what's ahead, and so our inclination was to go to solid ground, and solid ground is Jesus, according to Jesus, and the foundation that we can build our lives on. Well, the early church knew this, and that's why they, as we said, they memorized these words of Jesus, and it's built in those 3 chapters as kind of a mnemonic device, as a way easy to memorize in the original language, easier.
Yeah.
So this is something for us to take seriously, and I think whenever it's been taken seriously through history, it's done some amazing things in the church, and we need some amazing things to happen in the church right now. We need the church to be the church, to be what Jesus had in mind, because right now there are a lot of cultural forces pulling us in all sorts of directions and testing our allegiances. Yeah. And boy, on top of all that, it's just been a rough week. Yeah. we could say that about every week, but
rough week
of news, and it's
I think
we're in troubled times, man.
I know. I think that you and I, too, just to be vulnerable here, I think that we experience rough weeks and rough days as pastors in ways that maybe not everyone experiences as intimately, because in some ways, we are community organizers. I mean, that's what we're doing in the church, is you and I, whereas everybody else has, I don't know that this is healthy, but they have the luxury of saying, I'm just going to kind of choose not to be part of community, or I don't need to be part of a community group, or you and I, our whole job is really revolves around community. That's the church, and then how to make community happen. And ironically, or not ironically, community is really the focus of Jesus' teaching today, what we're going to be talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
And I can hear sirens. I don't know.
Speaking of community, the sirens are going off again.
This kind of thing, I don't know if anyone else can hear the sirens, but that happens all the time on sermons on Sunday and stuff. There's always distractions and noises from out. It's part of being in the city, so we just roll with it. But I just think that community, obviously, I'm stating the obvious, that community is vital. Yeah. It's foundational to the church.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Isn't that should be obvious? Community is foundational to the church.
No, say it louder, man. Say it, yeah.
We don't have a church without
it's not.
community.
It's not. I don't think it's obvious to, American individualists.
Yeah.
So let's keep saying it.
There's a lot of people out there who would say teaching and knowledge and that kind of thing
Yeah.
are really the cornerstones of the church. But
personal, private relationship. Yeah.
It's never really the case.
No.
It's community is foundational. We don't have the church without community, and Jesus, of course, knows that.
Mm-hmm.
I've often said that the whole Sermon on the Mount, in some ways, is a big, large teaching on community. But I feel like in the section that we're looking at today in Matthew 7, that Jesus is really narrowing the focus to. We would call it community. It could be as simple as how we get along with each other. And really what he's doing is he's talking about the problem. I would say problems, plural, but I think he's whittled it down to the problem of community.
Okay.
Like the core issue with why relationships dissolve, why friendships break up, and why community can be tough. So having said all of that, let me just ask you a question, Rustin, because you're a community organizer. And this is a season of viruses. We're talking about viruses. So
Plural. Viruses. Yeah.
What would be the virus that tends to hurt community the most in your experience? Okay, this is just your experience.
Oh.
You're sharing your story. So here you are. You're neck deep in community. You care richly about it. And there's a virus, there's a COVID of community that breaks it up and can cause community to go bad. What would you name that as? And in fact, I'll let you name more than one.
Okay, good. Because you know me, I want to get it right, and so I want some time to think
What's
about it.
What's the right answer?
I want to ponder this for a little bit. So just off the top of my head, I don't want to be too influenced by where we are at the moment, but I mean certainly. Selfishness, pride, lack of taking other people seriously. I think it's a constant fight. It's I kind of relate it to mask wearing. Suddenly, it occurs to me that at least for a long time, we were talking about mask wearing as something that you do for other people, and therefore. A lot of people just don't do it because there's a sense in which you have to appeal to the selfishness that we all have, some of which is good, of like, how's it good for me? What's in it for me? There's a guy in our church years ago who always asked that, but we have to answer what's in it for me. And I'm like, yeah, but that. And you're just reinforcing this kind of consumeristic approach, which is what I always want to subvert. And now we're finding, of course, that masks, there's some evidence that they actually prevent you from getting sicker than you might, even though they don't totally prevent an infection, apparently. Currently, that's the thought. So there is some benefit to yourself, and that I was like, oh, good, at least maybe that'll sell it better, and then more people will wear the mask. It's a similar thing to community of what I'm always telling people is, that, get in a small group, and it's not about what works for you. Oh, that small group doesn't do the book I want to do, or it's not the people I want. Yeah, well, it's not really for you. It's for the other people in the group that you're there, and they're there for you, and especially those that irritate you the most. That's the way you learn how to love one another, right? So I think that's a long answer to your question.
That's good.
Some of the things behind that I think are a self-centered, self-absorbed kind of posture of what's in it for me. Which maybe is pride, or I don't know how I might name that eventually. But then certainly just the judgment of others and the dismissal of people that I think I don't want to be around, or I don't have something in common with, or which maybe includes some fear of being dismissed or judged. Or
well, I was going to ask you to share some examples from your church using specific names.
Okay.
Okay. But I won't.
Yeah.
But I hear you. The what's in it for me attitude. And it's interesting, when you were talking, I was thinking, boy, there are so many ways where as the church we either cater to that or we are tempted to cater to it. Like, let me be sure to let you know how this church is in it for you, and so we just kind of feed that kind of ego-driven posture.
Yeah, it's unintentional because the desire is to just meet people as they are and welcome them into what's going on, hoping that something else will take root. But you can do a lot of damage probably by inviting them on the wrong ramp to begin with.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The on-ramp.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious.
What was the old quote? It was Chesterton or somebody brilliant who said it. There's if you board the wrong train, there's no use like running down the corridor in the opposite direction. Like you're just on the wrong train. You need to get off that train and board the one that's going the right direction. And I think that's sometimes the trick of community. We have to enter it. It's why the early church entered through baptism and death.
Yeah, right.
Death to self. Yeah. Because there's almost no recovering from how we will make everything about ourselves and what's in it for me.
And the key is that can be a virus.
Yeah.
That spreads through a community. We were just talking about small groups because both of our churches are starting small groups, and we were just talking about how both of us have these experiences with small groups because you always think small groups are great. The goal is to get everyone plugged into small group, blah, blah, blah. But both of us have experiences in our past of small groups going sour. Like they can go really south fast, and they can become like pockets of disgruntledness, where it almost is like there's a disgruntled virus that spreads, and then before you know it, that small group has left your church, because they all got really mad, and so we were talking about how it's so important for us to try to set our small groups up healthy, so that they don't become pockets of discontent, but instead spread health with the church. And it's just interesting when you experience those kinds of dynamics firsthand, quite a bit.
Well, it's we had a mentor who used to tell us the old quote about how you solve problems but manage conditions. I always wonder, is this a problem to be solved or a condition to be managed? And sometimes I think it's a condition because I find it even in myself, just the drift toward I just want to be around people that are easy to be around. I don't want to work that hard. I just want to read the book that I want to read. Don't make me do too much homework. Meet at a convenient time for me. We're all that way. I don't mean to dismiss anybody else because of it.
And that's the problem. And then you try to form community out of a bunch of people that are that way, and that makes our job hard. That's in some ways where we earn our paycheck. Yeah,
by irritating people enough to keep disrupting. Right. It is. There is something to it. We're set up to be the natural enemy of people's comfort.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the things that we've talked about are exactly, I think, what Jesus is addressing in Matthew 7. And the thing is, I kind of see it this way. I think as soon as we build a relationship with somebody else, because community can be 5 people or 100 people, but it can also be 2 people, So so I think that Jesus makes it simple by whittling it down to 2 people examples, but they're meant for community in general. But as soon as I have a relationship with somebody else, immediately what we do, and this is all subconscious, we don't do it consciously, but we posture. And I assume a posture with you, and the tendency left to ourselves, I think, is to posture ourselves above or below somebody else, and most people default to posturing above. Because we find fault in the other person, and we see that fault, and so we build a relationship, but that relationship is seen through a lens that's totally a lens shaped like me and my strengths and the things that you do that irritate me, and so we might have a relationship or we might have community, but we are postured, and I'm postured. It's rarely equal. You know what I'm saying? I don't even know if it's possible for it to be an equal thing. But
well, I'm obviously above you.
Exactly. So I don't know. Does that make sense?
There's a sense in which we are constantly sizing up one another, so that we have an advantage wherever we need it. Yeah. That's pretty gross to say it that way, but I think that's right.
But if you listen to the way people talk, you can hear it all the time. It almost seems like there's this built-in need for us to be sized up with an advantage, like we're better than. That's what fuels gossip. That's what fuels.
Well, take a like economic sense. That people are poorer than me because I work harder than them. People are richer than me because they have it easier than I have.
Yeah, right.
Either way, I'm putting myself above.
Yeah, you're in the advantage.
Yeah.
Either way.
Yeah.
So I think that we tend to do this with each other a lot.
Yeah.
And maybe especially with people that are in positions of authority, but I don't even know if we need to go there. But yeah, it's just, this is something that I think Jesus is addressing. And so he does it in a very clever way, and he uses language that has become part of our collective conscious, which is really cool. I mean, you mentioned that these passages, that the Sermon on the Mount was memorized in the early church. Yeah. And we hear that and we think, oh my goodness, I could never do that. And then you realize that we kind of have, a lot of us have memorized this. We don't realize we've memorized it, but in little snippets, every snippet we have
it's very familiar.
Which is a good thing and a dangerous thing, because familiar needs to become unfamiliar again so that it can become new to us.
Yeah, well said.
But Rustin, would you read this,
sure.
At least the first part of this passage? And
we're in
talk about
Matthew 7, the beginning of
the
third chapter of this. So Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And we're into chapter 7 finally.
Yeah.
And we'll go from verse 1 to verse 5. It goes like this. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye.
Yeah. I mean, that in and of itself kind of preaches. So, I mean, what you want to do is just tell everyone to hit pause and then to talk with each other about, I'd love to hear the conversations that come from that. But I want to begin. I've got a question for you, and this is not in my notes. This is off the top of my head. Okay.
Awesome.
So, I think that I'm not exactly sure how to read this. I think for a long time, when I heard "do not judge, or you will be judged," with the same measure you give out, it will be given to you. I think my tendency was always to think that Jesus was speaking about God. Like, if I judged, then God would judge me. And if I dole out a lot of critique and criticism on somebody else, then God will dole that out on me. But I feel like there might be a more human principle being taught here, that this is kind of the way we tend to interact with each other. When people are real judgy to us, we tend to become judgy to them.
Oh,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And like this is the way community tends to work. If you dole out a lot of criticism, people are going to respond by criticizing back. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I had a friend years ago who would always say, we teach people how to treat us. We teach people how to treat us.
Yeah. By the way that we...
Yeah, so if you come in with lots of critique and judgment, and that's going to come back at you.
Yeah.
Kind of talking about karma. I don't want to get into Eastern religion, but I'm totally into it. It's interesting. Karma is what goes around comes around. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. Christianity adds this layer of grace, which says that there's something, as St. Bono said, it travels outside of karma. It's an invitation to do something that's not just a response to what you're getting, the energy you're getting thrown at you. It's not just to react to it. It's to transform it and act in grace. But it doesn't negate the principle that you're talking about.
Yeah.
That how you treat others tends to come back to you.
Yeah. My question was, I don't know which one of these Jesus means right now. Whether he means this is how God sees you, or if this is just this human principle. But I don't know if you know either. I just think that in the context, I mean, he's given some pretty practical teaching here.
Yeah, it almost doesn't matter for the sake of how are we going to be a community?
Yeah,
Let's not sit around and argue about that. Let's try to do this.
Yeah. So maybe we could talk some about judgment and judging, because that's a general word. It implies a lot, and I, for one, am going to suggest that it's not always a bad thing to judge.
No.
And it depends on what we mean when we talk about judging.
Yeah. So what do you think about that? Because judge is a word with nuance, but nuance. I mean, let's brainstorm some of the possible range of meanings here.
Yeah. Well, I have opinions, and I don't think it's wrong to have opinions.
Yeah.
And some people could say that's judging,
Yeah.
but I don't know that that is judging.
Yeah. Well, if I disagree with them.
But it's okay if you disagree. If I have an opinion and you have a different opinion, we can both judge and still get along.
So that's
right?
a kind of a judgment of it's like aesthetic of preference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is similar to like discernment.
Yeah. Surely Jesus is not saying that we can't call wrong wrong and right right.
Yeah.
Even though I shy away from those words,
Yeah.
I feel like we're more healthy the more we back away from words like good and bad and just right and wrong. But still, at times we have to be able to say, oh, that's not right. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. Or healthy.
We need
It's
to be
not
able
healthy.
to name evil.
Mm-hmm.
In order to organize our lives. I wrote down a couple of things because, boy, I've been targeted. I don't know about you as a pastor. Do not judge. The Bible says don't judge, you know. But that doesn't mean anything goes, as you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get through a single day without making judgments. If we're just talking about discernment of, you know, is it safe to walk across the street right now? That's a judgment.
Right.
Should I get into business with this person or close this deal? Well, you better have some judgment about that. So there's that sort of judgment, and then there's the other end of judgment, which is I would think of it as condemnation, or maybe worse than condemnation, like dismissal. You know, not acknowledging the human dignity and worth of another person that you disagree with. That kind of judgment, I don't think we have any business touching. But here's some things the New Testament says. James 4 says, "Why do you judge each other? Don't you know that there is one judge?" I don't know if he was laughing when he wrote that. In other words, don't you know that there's one judge and it's not you?
Yeah,
I think
it's a good one.
Who are you to judge your neighbor? It's not your role to be the judge of another. Now he's not talking about discerning who's, you know, you'd let babysit your kids.
Mm-hmm.
He's talking about some sort of condemnation or dismissal. Paul in Romans 14, he says, "You then, why do you judge your brother or sister? Why do you treat them with contempt?" So there's Paul further defining that kind of prohibitive judgment, contemptive judgment. "For we all will stand before God's judgment seat." In other words, we're all same boat. So that's some insight. Judgment, the judgment that's forbidden is connected to contempt or condemnation. But then, let me give you another one. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 5, "What business is it of mine to judge those outside the church?" So that's consistent. "But are you not to judge those inside?" In other words, he goes on, God will judge those outside, but those inside we are to judge. Now, is he talking about condemning people in the church? Some people think so.
What is Paul talking about there, you think?
That's a good question.
That's a good question.
Let me just throw another one out. Jesus, I didn't write this down, but I think it's John 7, or people can look it up. Jesus says, you are to judge rightly, with righteousness. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So which is it, Jesus? Is it do not judge? So you get what we're getting at. There's some different nuances in the word to judge. Yeah. But we're not saying, when you say do not judge, we're not saying anything goes. Yeah. But we are saying there's a role that God plays in some sort of final pronouncement about people, and that's not our job. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like we maybe say so often, this is an invitation to actually use wisdom and think. So it's not all judgment's not bad. There's an appropriate kind of judgment. Yeah. But I really like what you're getting at, Rustin, and I think that it cuts to the core of what this is a condemnation. Yeah. Like that your value is not there. You don't have value. Yeah. And I feel like maybe Jesus is mentioning this because that is more prevalent than we might acknowledge, that we tend to do that to people. There's not this person I dismiss. I dismiss you by walking away and ignoring, or however that might look. I simply dismiss you and your importance. Yeah. I think that we've all done that, even though we might not be aware of it, and we've been on the receiving end of that too. Probably everyone knows what it feels like to receive that. Yeah. And it sounds so harsh when you just name it. Yeah. I don't think that people's intentions are to do that necessarily. Although I have known one person who always walked around talking about his plane and the different people that were on his plane. And I was like, what do you mean by plane? And he said, well, that's the plane that crashes. In other words, all these people, the world would be better off if they were all dead. Oh. And he had people like Oprah, I remember, on there. And
really?
And but it always stuck with me because it was so violent and so harsh. But there was a guy who just embraced condemning people. Like certain people, it was okay to condemn. And he felt good about himself because he was condemning people. And most of us aren't as outward and vocal about that, but it probably is how a lot of us think, right?
Yeah. I'm not going to admit that.
Yeah,
if that's true.
I'm not going to admit that one.
Yeah. Probably the difference between that guy and the rest of us is just a sense of self-awareness and social appropriateness.
Yeah, right. And this was years ago, so he was very young. That kind of attitude tends to come with youth, too. It's the madness of youth.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he goes from this idea that we don't do that, that we don't dismiss people and in each other's value, into this metaphor of a plank in dust.
Yeah. But at the same time, this idea of judging those in the church in terms of, if judgment looked like removing a speck, that would be a different kind of judgment also. Right? The kind of judgment he's talking about is removing you have a speck in your eye, let me remove it. Mm-hmm. That's interesting because in the ancient world, if you had a speck in your eye, like if you have a speck in your eye now, what would you do?
Look in the mirror.
Yeah, you go fix it up. In the ancient world, only the very wealthiest people had mirrors, right? So if you had a speck in your eye, if this was 2,000 years ago, you'd be coming to me, hopefully to your wife, not to me. But you'd say, can you help me get this speck out? Now, would you want me getting the speck out of your eye if I had a huge plank in my eye, something obstructing my vision?
Yeah,
right. You want me to work on your eye for you, John?
You would have no ability to help me.
No, I would do some serious damage, potentially.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that there's never a time that I can remove the speck from your eye. It would be nice if I didn't have specks in my own eyes and I had my glasses on and I was, maybe a magnifying glass and I was ready to do that work. That would be me taking care of my business and being prepared. It would be even better if you invited me to do it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I didn't assert myself and say, you got a speck in your eye, let me come fix that.
Yeah.
How often is that going to work? I don't want most people touching my eyes. I don't care who they are.
Yeah. It would take an amazing amount of self-awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
think about how seldom that has ever happened, where somebody has said, "Oh, I've got something that I need to work on about me, and will you help me do this?"
Yeah.
You would think in our profession we would be approached more with that kind of thing, but even in our profession, it just doesn't happen.
Almost never.
Yeah.
Once in a while.
Yeah.
Once in a while, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
When it does happen, and it's humbling, and it immediately causes me to examine my own planks and specks.
It does.
Yeah.
I know from experience that whenever somebody from your church or my church will call us and want to get together to talk about their marriage or talk about a problem that they're having in their life or something like that, when we tell each other, we're usually really excited. And I've heard you say before, this is so awesome because I get to do a pastoral thing.
Yeah.
Usually the calls we get are not about the pastoral stuff. They're about administrative stuff and calendars and when is this going to happen and who's cleaning this and how's this.
A running toilet.
Yeah. But whenever you get that rare call where somebody says, I actually do have something going on in my life and I could use your wisdom and your advice. It's like, wow, I get to be a pastor. I can't wait. Yeah.
Like when everybody calls you up and says, John, I'm really struggling with who to vote for. Can you give me some advice?
Like that happens so often. Yeah. That's a little scary. I don't want anyone to call me asking that question. Yeah.
It is true though, because when most of us have pain in our eye for some reason, it seems like that pain is coming from the other person. And so instead of saying, can I get help with the speck in my eye? It's usually like, why are you causing this pain in my eye?
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of projection in our culture. And I do the same, we all do the same thing. I do it all the time. I have something that's painful, and so immediately I'm looking for reasons why it's happening, and the mirror is not handy.
Yeah.
I'm looking, you're sitting here, maybe it's your fault.
Why do you think our tendency is to judge other people so harshly and not judge ourselves as harshly? I have an answer.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I would guess. I'd love to hear what you,
Well,
if you've thought about it, what
yeah.
would you say?
one of the reasons, and you have to think about this for a little bit, but I think it ties in with this. One of the reasons it's easy for me to dismiss you, and even though I'm aware of all of my faults, not dismiss myself, is because I know myself so well. In other words, when I say that, I'm specifically talking about my intentions. I know my intentions.
Yeah.
I know that I'm a good guy underneath it all, you know, or at least I have some kind of confidence of that.
Yeah.
And so even though I'm screwing up over here, I know that my intentions are good, and so I give myself all kinds of grace. But I feel like we don't know each other as well. And so we don't take, let me just add to this, not just intentions, I also know my story. I know my backstory. I know where I've come from. I know the struggles I've had with my family. I know, what I had to go through growing up. I mean, I factor in all of those things. But with you, I don't do that. I don't know your intentions.
Yeah.
Very rarely when I'm dealing with the other person do I know what they've had to go through and what has contributed to their stuff. And all we see is what is whatever is affecting us. Yeah. And it's easy to place judgment there because we don't know all of the intentions in baggage that person's carrying.
That's right. Yeah, we tend, what's the saying? We tend to judge others by their actions, but ourselves by our intentions.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And in these days, man, we don't even know what that person's gone through today to get to this conversation. Well, we both have kids in school. That's been a major problem. We both have families of mixed opinions on politics. That's a major stress. There's also this little thing called a pandemic going on. There's so many stressors right now that we need more than ever a sense of let's all just slow down a little bit and assume something good in the other and be patient and work for one another.
Yeah.
It's how we speak and act to one another.
Yeah.
Takes a little bit of not reacting. It takes a little bit of take a step back.
Yeah. Ask
a question. Try to get some perspective.
But the part of this,
the
part of this about seeing the plank in our own eye, that's another big part of the equation. Because in order to do that, I also do have to really know myself, and I have to know my baggage. And I guess there's a flip side of this conversation where we don't take the time to know ourselves very well, and we assume that our intentions are always really good, and we don't ask ourselves the hard questions. And so that's the process of addressing the plank in our eye. And there are so few people, including myself, that really take the time to do that.
Yeah.
But that's an enlightening thing.
It's enlightening. I'd like to ask you how you do that. But let me comment while you're thinking about how you do that. I don't know if it's humor or terror in this teaching of Jesus, but just the concept that I could go to remove a speck in your eye, which is just a metaphor for a small matter, while having a plank, a large matter, in my own vision, my own way of seeing, that can exist is a terrible thought. That I could be so deceived, I could be so restricted in my vision, and yet think that I'm capable of addressing your small issue. That's horrifying.
Yeah.
It's horrifying that can exist, but that's who we are as humans. We can be so self-deceived in how we see and what we see, which just leads to more nitpicky judgment of one another.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So does anything come to mind? What do you do to clear the lens? We've talked about this lens of generosity that we see through, and does anything come to mind? Yeah.
I mean, the first thing I think of is that's where community comes into play. I mean, that's where I am at a point where like to invite other people who I trust into that conversation to expose for me where I might be falling short and what I need to work on.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the byproducts of marriage, is we tend to do that for one another, whether we want it or not. And a lot of people, that's where they struggle in marriage, is because they weren't expecting that. But that's what we do, is we help each other see our planks. But good friends. And I went through a situation at our church recently where the same day that it happened, I called you. And I just ran through with you step by step everything that happened, so that I could hear, you tell me like where I was right and where I was wrong, and where, and that's really helpful. It's really good.
It is helpful, and you're way better at it than me, because one of the methods you use with me over the years that I've noticed and appreciated, and I try to do better on my own. I'll recount to you a conversation. Hey, there's how this conversation went, and and you know what you do to me. I'm expecting you as my friend to go, yeah, well, you're so right. But almost without fail, you will go, now wait a minute. Did you actually say those words?
Yeah.
Like, no, not your impression of what just happened, but what did you actually say?
Yeah.
And what did that person actually say? And that just, after I got used to that with you, I would slow down and go, okay.
I know.
Because I'm probably, I can be overreactive.
Yeah.
I'm an emotional person, unapologetically so. But it helps me slow down and be accurate, and then get wisdom. And sometimes that means, I need to hear that from you. But you know what? In my life, you're one who has permission to do that. And I don't want everybody coming up and doing that to me. That would annoy me to death.
I think that I consciously do that with people. I try to not assume other things about the other person. So what we have to do is ask all the right questions about that person to try to get their intentions and stuff. Yeah. It's so funny you say that, because I do that with my wife too, and she will get mad at me like, I just want you to take my side. Right. And I'm notorious for not taking someone's side.
That's a good question maybe to start out with. Like, what's my role in listening here? Am I just to support you, or are you actually problem solving, and can I be a conversation partner? Yeah. I mean, but that would be a great skill to develop in friendship and marriage. Yeah.
And we need to be able to do that with ourselves too. Yeah. And I feel like when I go to prayer about conflict that I'm having with people, that's where God takes me. And it immediately is to this place of, well, who are they? What's really going on? Yeah. Who are you? And it's all about,
Yeah, seeing seeing relationships in general, whether in marriage and friendship, in small groups, in the church, that ability to learn how to sit in prayer and have a perspective outside of my own reactivity. Yeah. And let Jesus be the one who comes and looks at it with me and says, okay, what's really going on here? Can you understand this person's position? Can you understand? Yeah. Can you see what's played into your own reaction? And then out of that moment, then there may be an occasion to remove some specks. Yeah. To go to work, to help one another when it's welcome.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, I don't know if we're going to cover it or not today, but that's bleeds into the next thing Jesus says. It's because what we have to do is we have to discern when is it okay to, I think I see something, Rustin. Yeah. Like I can see your specks. Yeah. And I'm acknowledging I have a plank, but when is it okay to step in and help someone with their specks, and when is it not okay? We might get into that next week, but I just want to say the word that is hovering over everything that we've been talking about is humility. I feel like humility is the condition that God wants in us. Yeah. And a good way to think about humility is when you know that there's a plank in your eye, or at least there's something in your eye, and you act accordingly. Which means, it doesn't mean that you just shut down. It just means that anytime I approach anyone or anything or any community, I approach it in confidence, but I approach it knowing that I have something in my eye too. Yeah. So that immediately readjusts the posturing.
That's so good. Yeah. I think of instances where what I've learned to do is to lay my agenda on the table first when I'm in a difficult conversation, to say, just so you know, this is how I am. These are things that are important to me, and that shades everything that I see. But I want you to know about those, because I don't want those to control our conversation That's a healthy thing, and it's a way to ask for help
Yeah.
from the other.
Yeah.
When you're doing hard work together.
Yeah. That's really good.
Yeah.
It's really good. And there's also that element where other people will lay your stuff on the table for you. And that always makes me real uncomfortable.
Right.
Like, oh man, you saw that and I don't want you to see that. Like there are parts of me that I'm trying to keep hidden. It's like, oh man, don't bring that up.
Yeah.
And so, but
Yeah.
that's even richer, humble.
That's maybe a great cliffhanger for next week, because
Yeah.
I'm really interested in how to be wiser about all this. This stuff is core to what it is to live in community, and we care so much about our churches and our communities and cultivating healthy relationships, both in families and in the church. I mean, we've given our lives to this work, and so I'm always desperate for the wisdom that we can get from Jesus, and I think some is coming in the very next passage.
Yeah.
I do think maybe a good place to leave it is just a real encouragement, again, to one another and to everybody who's listening or watching, that we need people in our lives who are given explicit permission to help us with the specks in our eyes.
Yeah.
People who are doing their own plank work.
Yeah.
Right? Because you don't want to do this with just
Right.
anybody. This has to be in relationships of trust. I know that you're doing your plank
Yeah.
work, so I know it's safe for you to do some work on my eyes. We need that in order to grow. You cannot grow without it. We're all deceived in the way that we see constantly, and we need one another to see more accurately.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, one of the reasons that you can speak into my life, as Rustin speaking into my life, is because you have humility. And I experience you as a humble person, so I can give you permission. And that's,
Yeah. What does C.S. Lewis say about humility? It's not thinking too much of yourself, or it's not thinking too little of yourself, but it's thinking of yourself less.
Yeah.
But I like to think of it as similar to that it's just, it's seeing accurately. It's knowing who you are.
Yeah.
And so you have no need to puff up, or you have no need to self-deprecate, but you're able to say, here's what I bring to the table, good and bad.
Yeah.
And inside of that, we can begin to have an honest relationship that's in reality.
Yeah. Sounds good. Well, then, does that set us up for next week then?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Man.
We need people in our lives who are given explicit permission to help us see and remove our specks.
Yeah.
People who are trustworthy and tested, and who have permission to tell us the truth about what they see, the good, the bad, and the ugly, which is really what this conversation could be called: the good, the bad,
and the ugly. But trustworthy and tested is important, and that can only happen in community, in relationship over time, when you get to know a person's life and whether or not they're able to do this kind of work with you.
Yeah, it's a good word.
Yeah.
All right, well, until next time, we'll get into the cliffhanger of the second half of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
All right.
amen, John.
Thanks, Rustin.